Recording in progress.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second webinar, the first of the new year. Very privileged to have Chairman Thomas Gleeson from the PUC on with us. He was with us at the Texas Nuclear Summit and gave us a lot of insight into what's going on at the PUC, what's going on from a public policy perspective, and some insight into how PUC and ERCOT are dealing with the really rapid growth. We're going to talk about a lot of those issues that we talked about a few months ago. ERCOT just put out a new, kind of a new market update, planning update, and the numbers continue to be pretty staggering. And I'll go ahead and kind of share a slide deck from, if I can do this, I'm not the best at it. Hopefully y'all can see that. So Chairman, if I may, I think we'll start here, if that's okay, with this update, kind of a follow on from the discussion that you and I had back in October. Obviously, you can see some key takeaways here. Interconnection queue is up 270% demand since January. So any kind of initial thoughts on what ERCOT has said, and then here's the interconnection queue, this is kind of the chart they always use that I really like, but any sort of, obviously tremendous growth continues. Anything that stood out to you from their update?
Yeah, first, Reed, thanks for the opportunity to speak to the Nuclear Alliance. Always appreciate the forum to have this discussion. And I won't take offense that I was the second webinar, not the first. I won't ask who the first was, but no, I agree with you. The numbers are staggering. They've been staggering for a long time. One of the kind of crazy numbers that I talk about often is in the first quarter of 2024, ERCOT got 8 large load interconnections, and in the last quarter of 2025, they got somewhere around 90. And so, what I continue to think about is how do we need to change our processes in order to accommodate all this load that is coming here? It's not going to stop. These numbers are going to keep continuing to go up and to the right. The slope of this curve is just going to continue to be up. And so we have to find a way to accommodate all of this. The president and the governor have both been unequivocal in their messaging that America needs to win this AI race. We want these companies coming here. And I'm of the belief, and I've told the governor this, that the only way America wins this race is if Texas wins this race, because we have the ability to act first, to act quickly. And so it's incumbent on all of us to figure out a way to meet the demand, to look at our resource mix, to make sure that we have dispatchable generation on the system, and that we're building enough transmission to move all of that power around the state. And so we're up to the task. I think a lot of these questions will have to be answered through definitely the first half of this year. But ERCOT and the PUC have started having conversations about how to do this, and will continue throughout the year.
Yeah, I think, what strikes me about it is that it's just unrelenting, right? I mean, you keep kind of thinking that it has to taper off, and then you keep seeing these reports from I guess I'll go down to the next, actually not this slide, this slide here. You keep thinking these are by submittal date, both number and then kind of total megawatts, and you keep thinking it's going to taper off, but 2025 in every quarter exceeded the biggest quarter, which was Q4, the last quarter of 2024. And so, it really is staggering. And obviously, you alluded to this in your comments, but going back to the mix, 73% of that is data centers, and they're separating out crypto from data centers. So, really when you include, crypto in that conversation, you're looking at large computer loads, making up almost 85% of, the new interconnection, which, segues into, what you said about, the administration and the governor and wanting to win the AI race. And, we certainly share your sentiment that if the U.S. is going to win it, the Texas is going to have to be, the major player in that. So, just speaking of, comparing Texas and ERCOT to other ISOs around the country, comparatively, um, what does ERCOT look like compared to the other major ISOs?
Yeah, I mean, from a load standpoint, the anticipated growth here is greater than anywhere else. And so, that is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. Again, because we don't have to deal with what I would call kind of the federal entanglements on a lot of issues, we're able to act really quickly to address these issues. If you look at some of what's been coming out of the Energy Dominance Council, what's been coming out of the federal level, a lot of it has kind of followed what we've done in Texas, whether that be Senate Bill 6, how we're dealing with counting large loads. They tend to look at what we're doing and somewhat follow us. And that's a great thing. We have an amazing relationship with our federal counterparts. Former Chairman Lake is now managing director of the Energy Dominance Council. And so we have a direct line to them. They have a direct line to me and to this agency. And so we can collaborate very closely on what the national and state policies need to be to position us to win this AI arms race. And so, we're blessed here. I don't think I would want to work anywhere else. From the market design here to the competitive market to the willingness, I would say, of state leadership to do what needs to be done to meet the demands and the challenges in front of us. I think we're as well positioned, if not better, than anywhere in the world to really meet these demands. And it's a true blessing to be able to operate in ERCOT and in Texas.
Yeah, my follow-up questions, I think you just answered, but just to maybe put a more direct point on it, and maybe to reiterate what you said, maybe Texas is getting all of this, projected growth more so than other ISOs because of, the unique marketplace, both being a deregulated market and also, the fact that it is less federally entangled, and because it's sort of wholly inside of Texas and therefore less regulation at the federal level. Is that sort of your do you perceive that that's a big draw for a lot of the AI data centers that are coming to Texas?
I think it is. I think there's a lot of attributes of Texas that the companies want, from land to workforce needs. Texas can meet a lot of those. I think the other thing too is if you look at kind of the political discourse here, I think you can see a progression in thinking. If you go back to say the middle of 2023 when AI data centers and compute really kind of became front page news, I think the initial thought was this is too much load. We don't want it to come to this state. If you look at where Senate Bill 6 actually finished, I think it shows a real progression in thought of what we need to do in Texas to bring this here, but to do it in a way that doesn't impair reliability and doesn't overly burden residential ratepayers on the cost side. Affordability is something that, post Winter Storm Uri, I would say kind of took a little bit of a backseat to reliability. As we get further and further away from Winter Storm Uri, I think it's incumbent on us to really consider affordability. And one of the best things about most of these data centers, particularly the hyperscalers I've talked to, they've all been willing to engage on what they can do to benefit the state with the projects that are coming here, whether that's to share costs, to pay complete costs, to ensure that affordability for residential customers isn't greatly impacted by all the transmission and distribution needs for these facilities. So they've been amazing, what I would call corporate citizens, in working with us to try to find solutions to a lot of the issues we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's a good segue to talking about cost and market prices. One of the things that, one of the questions I asked you and Bill at the summit, was, sort of alluding to the disconnect between prices and, this forecasted load growth. I guess a two-part question for you. Is the disconnect still there, or are the forward pricings really finally starting to, recognize this, continued wave of growth? And if not, the question I asked at the summit is, which one is wrong? I think I know the answer to that, but curious to hear your follow-up, a few months later.
Yeah, no, there's still a disconnect. the forward prices don't reflect the scarcity that I think we see in the out years. And a lot of that is because so much of this load is considered speculative. And, if you look at the estimate from ERCOT for peak load in 2031, it's around 220 gigawatts before they revised it. That's not a real number. We can't accommodate that much load in this state from a transmission perspective or a generation perspective. But it's definitely a lot more than the 85 gig peaking system we have right now. I think I said this when you asked me the question at the summit. If someone asked me, to bet an amount of money that was important to me, I'd say somewhere between 110 and 130, 35 is probably the right number. But we have to do our work as required by Senate Bill 6 to get some guardrails around the forecasting of load so that there's more precision to it and there's more confidence that it's a real number. The other issue that I think has also become very apparent is the cost of new entry of, say, a combined cycle gas plant has also increased a lot over the last couple of years. So it's not just enough to say that we, need to get the cost right. We also need to recognize that the amount of capital needed to build these facilities every day that they're not being built is going up. So that's why we have to address this issue now. To your second question, I'm probably always going to say that the market is right, the numbers are right from the financial markets, and so until there is more certainty around and confidence in the number for the load forecast in those out years, I think you're going to continue to see those forward prices being significantly lower than what we would consider the cost of new entry of a combined cycle plant, definitely. And so that's something we have to continue to deal with. We have projects ongoing here to implement Senate Bill 6. One of them is to refine the way that transmission companies count load. And my hope is by the time we get to that, we'll have a much better number for 2032, and you'll start to see the scarcity that we believe is truly going to be there in 2032 reflected in those forward prices.
Yeah. So you talked about generation mix a minute ago, and we talked about it at the summit, just in terms of needing dispatchable energy and nuclear potentially being a major player in that. I think the other thing that maybe gets a little less news, the headline is always when ERCOT puts out one of these reports is always the load side of things and how much projected load there's going to be, and obviously a lot of media attention on the AI data centers and that issue as well. I think what's lost sometimes by the media is the the generation interconnection request and the potential what that is going to look like and how much not just how much is coming, but what the type of generation is here. So I've pulled up ERCOT's, as of, I think this is sort of October 31st, there it is. A ton of solar and a ton of batteries. Curious your take on this chart. And, I think a follow-up is, given that so much of the projected growth on the generation side between now and 2031 is going to be solar plus batteries. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought would be, it's great that energy storage and solar want to come to the state. Renewable resources are really good for keeping costs down for consumers. Storage is super helpful in the summer around the solar ramp. It's really helpful, in both the morning and the night in winter. But a lot of the companies coming here, a lot of the resources that want to be here need 24 by 7 power, 24 by 7 power by 365. And so with that being said, we are not going to solar, wind, and storage our way out of this. We're going to need more thermal dispatchable units that are really only constrained by fuel availability, which typically is not an issue. And so you're right. You've heard me say before, I think I've told this anecdote previously. I went to a renewable energy conference, a clean energy conference, and talked about how important I thought nuclear was to the future of Texas, given our load growth, to ultimately find out that it was a clean energy conference, but it was sponsored by only wind and solar resources. And so I got a lot of, I didn't get a lot of response to my comments, which are generally always the same, that given the load growth here, if you are someone who believes in a clean energy future and wants a clean environment, and you don't believe nuclear is going to be part of that solution, one, your math doesn't work, your math doesn't math, and two, I honestly don't think you're serious about the issue, because there is no reality in which we can continue to have this growth in renewable resources without some really meaningful growth in dispatchable thermal resources and meet the growing need here. And so that's my first thought. The second is that gas number of 48 is great. Where prices are right now, I'll be interested to see how many of those projects actually hit a commercial operation date. I think it's harder and harder. There's some Texas Energy Fund projects in there, and some others. There's some net metering arrangements that some companies are entering into that will also be grid facing, that are counted in there. But I think if we're really looking to have meaningful investment in grid facing resources on the thermal dispatchable side, we have to address the fact that revenues just aren't there to support that right now. And, like I said at the outset, affordability is an important thing, but so is reliability. And so there's a trade-off there. There's a tension there, which is needed. And, the cure for those high prices when they come because of scarcity is high prices, because more resources come driving prices down. That's how the economics of a well-functioning, efficient market should work. And so, our goal here is to design the market such that we show those signals for scarcity, that they are real and they need to be met. Resources come here because prices dictate that capital needs to flow here. Then enough capital flows here and there's enough investment. Those resources come online and prices go down. And that's really how this should work if it's a well-functioning, efficient market. Right now, I don't think that it is that, what we would want, and there are not those clear signals. And our job at the commission is to try to get that right, and that's what we endeavor to try to do every day.
Let me ask maybe a slightly tougher question on this topic, and it's one that I really don't know the answer to. I have suspicions about it, and I'm not asking you to pick a favorite kid, so to speak, but you know we need the scarcity pricing in order to bring more dispatchable investment here, more investment in dispatchable energy here, whether that's gas or nuclear or something else. And I think that's somewhat in tension with your other comment, which is you know, solar and batteries and even wind do, a pretty good job of, pushing down prices for consumers. And, solar and batteries seem to be carrying the load, um, at a time when otherwise we might be seeing scarcity pricing. So I guess, I guess my question is, will we see the scarcity pricing that is needed? If the market is left to its own devices, will we see that type of scarcity pricing that will incentivize more dispatchable energy, whether it's gas or nuclear or whatever? If we see this type of growth in, solar and battery generation coming online.
Yeah, I think you may just have to change when you think there is scarcity pricing. So I think one of the kind of outflows potentially of all this energy storage is you may start to see more scarcity in, overnight when the wind isn't blowing, there's no solar and batteries have already fully discharged. So I think it may change, kind of the framework by which we think when there's going to be scarcity pricing. The other thing I would say is, the market design needs to value reliability. And right now, I don't know that it does. And that's not to say, and I would never say that solar, wind are not reliable. They're variable. But I think it's hard to debate that it is a more reliable resource, one that is only really constrained by fuel availability, not by the kind of weather conditions. We're not great at predicting the weather, particularly on wind. You've heard me say before, the kind of worst days I have in this job are when we have high thermal outages, when the wind isn't blowing, and it's really hot in places where people live and there's no sun where the solar panels are. And so we need more thermal dispatchable on demand, flip a switch. We are relatively assured that that power is going to be there. I don't think the market design currently really values that. We have to look for ways through our market design to flow additional revenue to thermal dispatchable resources. On the kind of affordability and cost side, you're definitely right. There's a tension as we get more renewables on, prices tend to go down. One of the ways we try to address that here is by looking for ways to change that market design and, be clear about what we're solving for, then flow revenues to those things. It has been difficult. It has been difficult because there can be no debate that the cost of new entry for a gas plant is not being met by the revenues in the system currently. But I will say I don't think that you're going to see enough battery storage, for instance, put on the grid to accommodate all of this load. So I think you will get scarcity pricing. The other thing that I think is important to remember, one of the things that constrains scarcity pricing right now is the amount of ancillary services that ERCOT has procured since Winter Storm Uri. That's been colloquially termed conservative operations. We call it reliability operations at the commission. I've said, I think pretty publicly for about the last year, both at PUC open meetings and at ERCOT board meetings, I think we have to have a real discussion around conservative operations, reliability operations, and whether or not they're necessary at this point. You can't have a system that is built on scarcity pricing then never allow scarcity pricing to occur. You have to have scarcity. Now, that doesn't mean we have to allow the system to get into, emergency conditions or into, rotating outage conditions. But you have to be willing to take on some scarcity in order for those revenues to be shown. And we just haven't been willing to do that since Uri. And I think that made a lot of sense in the months and maybe even, a couple of years after Winter Storm Uri. But I think now is we have a perfect opportunity to talk about how we accomplish the goals that we've set forth. And one of them has to be to allow for scarcity pricing and for our system, our market design to actually work.
Yeah, I think another tension that, I think is very palpable in the Capitol right now is, between this, need for investment in dispatchable energies, the Energy Fund, Texas Energy Fund being, a prime example of, the will of the legislature seeking to, incentivize that type of investment with, and that depending on scarcity pricing. I mean, ultimately, debt capital, we talked a little bit about this at the summit, that debt capital is, only helpful if, the investors also see revenue on the other side of the transaction. And so what that means is, a certain price level that is going to support that investment, whether there's debt capital or not. And but then there's a tension. I think the recognition of, folks in the Capitol that that's how our market works, and that's how it's been very successful for a couple decades at this point. But policymakers are super sensitive to rising prices for, residential consumers in particular. Do you think policymakers are, I feel like this is coming. I mean, I read an article the other day where, basically for 10 or 15 years, residential prices were flat. And, they've gone up about 30% since Uri, which is faster than, the rest of the country. Although we still have lower prices than about half the country. And they're projected to go up another 30%. And so, that kind of, increase in prices for consumers is already getting and is very likely to continue to get a lot of attention inside the Capitol. And so my question is, from your perspective, being, in those discussions with policymakers, do they appreciate that this is coming, and are they prepared for, ultimately that this is how our market works and this is what is going to bring about, to your point earlier, this is how you end up with the investment in dispatchable energy?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. For the longest time up through Winter Storm Uri and just after, residential rates in particular were flat and only really increased with kind of inflation. They kind of tracked really well with inflationary pressures. Since then, they've gone up. I think there is a lot of times a misunderstanding of why they've gone up, though. The majority of that, and the IMM, I think the Independent Market Monitor does a good job of talking about this, is again because we've continuously procured every day and in every season just an abundant and more than we need amount of ancillary services, which has caused those to go up. I think a lot of times people think because of all the growth, the real increase is because transmission costs have gone up. And while they have gone up, I think the thing to remember is transmission costs really are just a math equation. You have the total investment divided by the total number of kind of billing determinants of folks that's spread over both people and businesses. So when you're building transmission to meet an ever increasing load, a lot of that gets mitigated, a lot of those costs. You can't escape ancillary services costs. And so I think one of the ways to mitigate that is to have a better functioning market and procure less ancillary services. I think another way, and I think this is really when I have meetings and discussions with leadership in the state, is they understand that prices have to go up. What they don't want to see is residential customers having an undue burden placed upon them, kind of not their fair share, to use a colloquialism that's used probably too much. They just want to make sure that all these businesses coming here are not avoiding their share of the costs and that residential ratepayers are the ones paying those. And so we have ways to address that. Senate Bill 6 requires us to look at how we allocate transmission costs around the state. And so that's something we'll do this year and come up with, by the end of the year, I think a better way of allocating those costs so that residential customers are not unduly burdened by that. It's always going to be a tension. It's always going to be an issue. No one likes higher prices. But I think at the end of the day, people understand we need, again, we need more thermal dispatchable units in this state. And we're not seeing that investment. Capital is mobile. Companies and investment firms can flow that capital wherever they believe they're going to get the best return. To your point about the energy fund, it was a great investment. And, we've had an amazing response to that. But to meet the growing demand, we need more than just that. We have to have a market design that provides those incentives. In this state, we believe in market-based solutions. We have to figure out a way to have the market signals reflect the outcomes that we want. And so that's what we'll continue to do. But you're right. There's always going to be that tension. But I think as long as the legislature, the governor, and honestly, people feel that they are not paying an undue share of what they should be paying for the reliability they're getting, I think they'll understand that the higher prices are needed for some amount of time in order to get the investment.
So, I mean, and I think, for obviously Trump and just in the last couple of days talking about AI data centers and the flip side, needing to pay their fair share. I don't know if those are the words he used, but basically needing to foot the bill for their heavy energy use. And obviously the impetus for that is a concern about, residential consumers and the prices that they're going to be feeling. It is almost like with such rapid growth in hyperscalers, both in Texas and otherwise, it's almost like we have a bifurcated market to a certain extent that is operating in, a single marketplace. You talked a little bit about market changes or tweaks, and maybe that's always a loaded term, and I don't want to scare anybody, but what do you see? Like you talked about, making sure capital flows to reliable electrons. What else is out there that could potentially be, alleviate the concerns on consumer residential users while still making sure that we're moving as quickly as possible to make sure that we are sort of the anchor of this, winning AI race?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing again is in the trade-off that I think is inherent between reliability and affordability. I think it's clear the state wants us to be looking at affordability again and have an eye towards that, which, like I said at the outset, maybe wasn't the focus, just after Winter Storm Uri. I think the other thing is, we have existing revenues in the system. So one thing that we try to do here is before we look to add additional revenue is to look to see if the existing revenues in the system are flowing to the resources that we would want them to achieve the outcomes that we think we're solving for. And so we look to do that. Senate Bill 6 has us implement a new, actually, it was House Bill 1500 has us implement a new reliability service, the dispatchable reliability reserve service that will flow revenues again as an ancillary service to dispatchable resources. We've had discussions here about, how the breakout of that really looks to make sure that we're not over procuring. So we're not asking any customers from residential to commercial to industrial customers to pay more than they need to, but also talking about ensuring that those revenues are flowing to the resources we want built in this state. And so I think that's the primary way that we continue to look to do this is understanding that if additional revenue is needed, while there are additional companies and people moving here, it is most likely going to result in short-term price increases. But the trade-off you're getting for that is increased reliability. And we've heard I've been in around the state talking to folks since 2021, and to a person, everyone says they never want to experience Winter Storm Uri again. And so I think they understand the value of reliability. We've made amazing strides to ensure Winter Storm Uri will never happen again. From hardening the grid to ensuring that we have, firming and backup. Like we've done a lot to ensure that it won't happen again. But we have to be concerned about affordability. And so you can't just look to continuously add revenue. You have to look at how existing revenues are being allocated, and that's something we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about, and we probably won't have time to, but that happened after Uri is very evident in the report that ERCOT, that's up on the screen right now. I mean, half the report is on weatherization and all the things that are being done to sort of make the grid more resilient. That I don't think it was that big of a part of ERCOT's reporting or activities prior to Uri. So obviously a lot been done in that regard. One question, my fetish, for lack of a better word, for the retail side of things, particularly for residential consumers. Just curious, how do you see that marketplace, retail, electric providers? How do you see that evolving? What tools can we give, um, residential consumers to, to alleviate some of the price increases that we are seeing in the wholesale market?
Yeah, the retail market here is, I would argue, for a long time been kind of the crown jewel in our market. We have an extremely robust retail market with a lot of competition. And, what we hope to accomplish out of that is a lot of innovation to provide options to customers to meet their needs. Coming out of Winter Storm Uri, obviously, there was a lot of discussion on the retail side about should retail customers, residential retail customers, be protected against the downside of some of the products that were out there. I think what was lost in a lot of that conversation was prior to those 5 days, those innovative products were extremely beneficial to the folks who had signed up for them. I understand, laws were passed to prohibit certain types of contracts and certain types of products, and I completely understand that given kind of what the outcomes were after Uri. But I think what again, as we move further and further away from Uri, I think we have to lessen, the grip that we have around this and trying to control it, allow that retail market to innovate, look at the products that are being done, that allow for demand side solutions for residential customers, that empower residential customers to take a more active role in their consumption and benefit from the market that we have, so that demand response programs, energy efficiency programs are not only the benefits of those are not only borne by large industrial and commercial customers. And so it's slow because of what happened during Winter Storm Uri, but I think we have to allow room if we want a competitive and robust retail market for that innovation. And then our role in that should be to, look, analyze, and iterate to see if there are potentially products that really open up residential customers to too much risk, and, have that discussion. But to just cut off the innovation, I think really does a disservice to residential customers and really, doesn't allow for the market to achieve its full potential. And so I hope that we can continue to try to loosen our grip on that and allow for the innovation that I think we've seen over time for the past 20, years in our retail market.
I got maybe two more questions. I want to remind folks that we will do some Q&A at the end here, so feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A. I think Lauren is going to moderate that for us coming up here in a few minutes. But switching gears, we talked a little bit about SB6. Could you just maybe give us a quick update on how the implementation of that is going? And I guess, do you see any, it's been in the news again. Do you see the legislature tweaking that or making changes to that next session?
Yeah, it's going well. Everything's on track. There's actually project updates. You can follow on our website to see where everything is. And we do it at least once a month in an open meeting. We get an update where all those projects are publicly so that everyone has full transparency. The two items that we highlighted and moved first were around kind of these net metering arrangements, where, a hyperscaler or a large industrial facility wants to co-locate with an existing generating facility. That obviously, given kind of the tenor and scope of what we dealt with during the legislative session, that idea caused a lot of discussion, and Senate Bill 6, requires us to address that and put some guardrails around it. That's moving at the pace and on the schedule that we had hoped for. The other one is around putting guardrails on how transmission distribution utilities count load. This, again, will be kind of the foundational issue for everything that we do. You have to get that number right before you can achieve any positive outcomes in any of the other areas we're talking about with large loads. And so those two are moving along. We have a lot of work to do. The legislature, for another session, gave us the resources that we asked for to be able to accomplish all this work, and I'm thankful for that. The agency now is, some 265, 270 folks. When I took over as executive director, we were somewhere, I think, operationally around 165. And so, in the last 5 years, we've grown, some 70%. And so that I'm thankful for that, even though there is a lot of work. But no, I think Senate Bill 6 is moving along really well. And I am heartened and believe we will get it all done. Absolutely.
So, just real quick, this is a nuclear webinar after all. Just wanted to ask you, a lot of folks from out of state are probably listening, a lot of people looking to develop and do projects here in the state of Texas. As nuclear moves closer to deployment, what considerations should developers keep in mind when engaging with the PUC and ERCOT and navigating that regulatory process? What advice can you offer them?
Yeah, I mean, first is to actually engage. I say this at every forum and every speaking engagement I have that, my hope is people that interact with us believe this is the most open and transparent and willing to engage commission in the country. We take every meeting. We want to hear from folks. I think it is clear that everyone here believes the best public policy is promulgated when we hear from all sides and have as full information as possible. I think, at a high level, it's clear from the work that's been done from the governor's mandate to this commission that was carried out by staff and former Commissioner Gloffelty that he believes and the state believes nuclear has to be a very important part of the future in Texas. I think when you look at the laws that were passed last session, creating the Texas Advanced Nuclear Office, and the money allocated from the state budget to try to advance that, I think it's clear that everyone's bought in on this, but we don't know what we don't know. Nuclear is something that, was pretty dormant in our discussions for a long time. And so, as with everything in Texas, we're trying to reduce red tape, to reduce regulatory impediments to being successful while ensuring that, the necessary work continues to get done. So I think having open and honest dialogue around what needs to be done to ensure that everything is being done safely and everyone feels comfortable with the work being done, but not overly burdening, any of the resources that want to come to Texas. We want to remove those impediments so everyone that wants to bring, a facility here can do that, and we can be a good and willing partner to help any company that wants to do business here work through not only issues in the state, but also with our federal counterparts as they deal with with the nuclear regulatory folks at the federal level. And so that's our hope here. I know that's the hope of the governor, that we can be that willing participant and partner in helping get more nuclear built in this state.
Well, I want to open it up for Q&A. So, Lauren, while you're getting ready and maybe queuing the first question, I did want to note that Chairman, you had some great news at the end of last year. You're now the proud husband to the deputy director of the Texas Advanced Nuclear Energy Office. So that's pretty exciting.
That is, yeah. We're now, a family employed by the state of Texas, and yeah, once that bill got passed, I was super thankful for the governor's staff and for Jared Schaefer, who was our governor's advisor at the PUC for a couple sessions, who is now the director there. Acknowledging that a lot of the work that needs to be done is going to be done on the grant administration side, and my wife for more than 20 years has been involved in grant oversight and administration, mostly for federal grants. And so I'm excited for her for the opportunity. I think she'll be a great blessing for the state of Texas, for her to bring her aptitudes and knowledge to this, to ensure that the money that the state allocated is allocated in the right way, and there's adequate oversight of it and processes around the money that's being given out, because that's what the governor and the legislature, I know, demand, and that's definitely what the people of Texas demand of their public funds.
Yeah, well, we're certainly really excited about that development and obviously really excited about how Jared is getting that office up and running. So look forward to a great 2026 implementing that fund and getting the funds out the door to some projects. So Lauren, any questions?
So far, there's no questions in the Q&A, and
Oh man.
y'all can either type a question in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you if you want to ask a question. But so far, it looks like you guys have literally covered everything anyone would want to know about. Oh, here we
Come on,
go.
you. Don't be shy, guys. Come on.
Professor Petticord from Texas A&M University, Reed knows him well, has a question. So, Professor, I'm going to unmute you.
Okay, hello, am I unmuted?
I can hear you. Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Okay, good, good. Yeah, thank you very much. This is just absolutely fascinating stuff. By background, I'm a nuclear engineer, and so the whole discussions that you're doing in terms of the market, how you match these and so on, is really fascinating, and one I'm in no way knowledgeable other than paying my monthly bill and so on. But you're right, Texas is a great place to be for this. So the impression I have is that we're facing this mismatch of the availability of dispatchable sources. And of course, we talk about the gas, and then of course, I along with Reed, am a fan of nuclear and so on. But it looks to me from the technology side, we have about this 4 year gap before these new systems are going to make it to the market. And when they do, I think it's going to, I believe, I could be wrong, that it's going to sort itself out well. I mean, the market's going to accept these. They are going to have to meet the fiscal requirements to be part of the market and so on. And so, like Uri was 5 days of bad news. We're about 4 years of questionable news until we can get these new systems to become available. And then I'm guessing maybe your life gets a whole lot easier because they can bring these systems in, they can meet the load demand and so on. So is it a correct perception on my part that it's really managing these, and I'm arbitrarily picking 4 years, but I think it's nominally a good number until these new SMRs, for example, can get to the market, of trying to manage this mismatch of availability of new dispatchable power and the incredible rising demand that you've outlined. And if that's right, what's your thinking in how to manage this?
Yeah. So thank you for the question. I'll meet your question with a howdy and a gig 'em as a
Well
as
done.
a fighting Texas Aggie class of '06.
Whoop.
And I love A&M. It's where I met my wife, and it's near and dear to our hearts. You are absolutely correct. There is an incongruence between the amount of thermal dispatchable generation that we need and that we have and the load that's coming on. I will say just a couple things though. Sometimes these numbers can look staggering because remember when we're building a transmission system, we're building for peak demand. Generation is really needed iteratively. So if you look at, say, I'll just choose Meta because they've, been in the news. Microsoft was in the news this morning talking about, and Reed, you said you didn't know exactly how President Trump termed it. I think he said pay their own way. Microsoft came out today saying that they are willing to pay their own way. But a 1 gig data center that has a commercial operation date of, say, January of 2029 is not going to need a gig of power in January of 2029. Most of the ramp rates for these facilities are somewhere between 200 and 250 megawatts a year. So you would look at 2029, 200, and then over the next 4 years, an additional, say, 200 megawatts a year. And so I think we need to be thoughtful about that when we're thinking about how much power is going to be needed in every year. But still a large misalignment that we have to correct for. I think in the short term, the thing that we all have to recognize is while we want more thermal dispatchable units and we are taking measures to do that, we don't want to dampen the investment for other resources. So the easiest example that I like to give is, like I said, energy storage has been extremely beneficial to this state. It helps us in our times of need. Those resources are online and helping us. I don't want to do anything that is going to tell every energy storage resource developer go somewhere else, because in the short term, we're going to need those energy storage resources. The goal, however, is to send those market signals that maybe cools that a little. It may dampen it a little. So maybe I would rephrase how I say that. But we don't want to enact policies that are going to make those resources completely leave the state. But we have to acknowledge that there is a trade-off between those resources and thermal resources. And so as we're looking to advance nuclear, as we're looking to get gas, which, for a long time has been the preferred generating resource in the state, as we're looking to get more of those types of resources, we just have to be honest about where we currently are. The answer cannot be that we look for ways to take existing, say, renewable resources or battery resources off the grid, because I think that would be very problematic for the system. So I think it starts with having those open, honest conversations. I think the second thing is, I agree with your timeline. I think if we can get the market signals and the pricing right, a lot of this will be corrected around 2029, 2030, 2031 timeframe, which is when I hope we see a proliferation of SMRs and nuclear resources. The governor has asked that in our policies and what we try to do, we do what we can to kind of pull those timelines forward for commercial viability. I don't know how much room there is in those timelines to pull it forward. If you can, de-risk these investments enough to pull them forward meaningfully, given kind of the constraints around supply chains and other kind of regulatory issues. But we're going to keep trying to do that. We're going to keep trying to provide those market signals to gas plants to come here so that, again, you have a good resource mix. The answer isn't all nuclear. The answer isn't all gas. The answer is a healthy mix of all of these resources, because they all have positive and negative attributes to them. So that's why you need a diverse resource mix to meet the growing demand here. And it's just trying to fine tune that and get that mix correct, which can be hard because we live in such a dynamic state that what we need is ever changing. When the state enacted the CREZ projects to get all of the wind, the untapped wind potential here, no one imagined that we would see the growth that we have seen, and that other policies, particularly at the federal level, would lead to such a proliferation of those resources and other renewables. That's our reality. Our job is then to take that reality and craft state policy to address that situation, and that's what we're going to keep doing. And again, I think we will continue to endeavor to send those market signals to thermal dispatchable, including nuclear, to try to make sure that this is a place that nuclear facilities can be built and that investors want to invest in. And we have time to do it, but time is of the essence. We cannot wait. We have to be doing that work today to get the outcomes we want in 2030 and 2031.
Thank you. Excellent. Appreciate it.
Lauren, any other questions?
Yeah, we have a question in the Q&A. We actually have 3. So let's start with a question from Brian Morgenstern. Are you tracking NERC standards regarding LVRT and other grid issues relating to data centers? Do you have a view about how they're approaching these issues? Will Texas align with them or go a different direction? So NERC standards regarding LVRT.
Yeah, so we are, those are discussions we're having with ERCOT around voltage ride-through issues. I think, given the amount of data centers coming here, I think obviously it's front of mind for our grid operator. This is one of those situations, again, we talk about trade-offs and tensions a lot here. We're economic regulators. There's a tension between wanting to get something right now and getting it right. And so voltage ride-through is an issue that we've been talking about for a long time from, with the proliferation of intermittent resources that we deal with on the generation side. And then now, with the kind of attributes of data centers and their low voltage ride through and their capabilities. We're definitely talking to the feds. We track what FERC is looking to do. But I think, one thing we are quick to point out always, our goal here, we know that Texas is unique and different. We try to find Texas solutions to problems. ERCOT has put forth some ideas. Our staff has some discussion drafts out around how to deal with this issue. What I've committed to everybody is we first have to understand not only kind of the first order issues that we're dealing with voltage ride-through issues, but kind of the secondary issues. And then we also need to understand what the first order, kind of second order and tertiary impacts of any solution we think that we're coming up with is going to have. And so this is definitely one of those situations where I understand the desire to move quickly because so much data center load is coming here. But that doesn't mean that we're going to move so quickly that we come up with either an answer that causes another problem or doesn't actually address the problem that we're seeking to solve. Because I think those are two things that people do not stand by when government does them, where you come up with what you claim is a solution. It either doesn't fix the problem and address it, or it makes it worse or causes other problems. And so we're definitely tracking what the feds are doing. We're having those conversations with our counterparts about what they're looking at. But as always, as we're looking to address those issues in Texas, we'll come up with a solution that works for Texas.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Dylan Moon has a question. They say, thank you for the great presentation. It is clear there are many problems that must be solved on the policy and market side. What can private developers be doing on the commercial and project development side to improve overall odds of success in the ambitious data center generation capacity build out required?
Yeah, I think developers can engage with the state meaningfully. I think be open and honest about the projects that are being developed, which ones are truly viable and which ones aren't. This is something, again, we're dealing with from a regulatory standpoint with our transmission companies, making sure that what they're putting forth, there is real belief that those projects will get built. And then I think engaging meaningfully on the issues that may be preventing capital from flowing to this state. I think it's, one of the things I try to do, I meet with financing outfits all the time, from very large ones to small kind of boutique investment firms to try to understand what we can do to make this an investment environment where everyone wants to flow capital. And so, from the load forecast, I think it's clear that businesses want to be here, but we also have to make sure that the investment climate is such that capital wants to flow here meaningfully. And I think we do a generally good job of that. But the most beneficial thing for me is to know when we're not. And so we can pivot, take that information and pivot what we're doing to address those issues. Because again, Governor Perry kind of, I think, coined this, but Texas is open for business. We want to be a business friendly environment. while still ensuring, from my perspective, reliability on the grid and affordability for customers. But we have to hear from the business community. I don't know, I won't claim to be nearly as well versed in, financial markets as the financiers are, and so we need to hear from the financing firms about what helps them flow capital here so that we are enacting policies to help accomplish that.
Awesome.
Thank
I think we have
you.
one more.
Yep, one more question.
And
Do you have expectations for the upcoming ERCOT Summit in Round Rock?
No, other than that we have a good lively discussions. I think those summits, whether they're put on by ERCOT or not, are a good place to share information and ideas. I try to make myself available to folks who maybe otherwise wouldn't have time to get around to talking to me. And so my plan is to have a good conversation during my portion of that, and then stick around to make sure people have access to me to talk through what's going on. And so I'd ask anyone that wants to talk about something to try to find time, whether in that forum or schedule time, because I'm more than willing and want to engage with everyone that has any point of view on this issue, because I think, again, that's how the best public policy is made.
all right. Well, Chairman, thank you very much for, spending a whole hour with us today. I know you're very busy. This has, I think, been a very lively discussion, and, obviously a very important one for us. We're, obviously there's a lot of focus on the development of the technology and, bringing it to market and the commercialization of the SMRs. But, understanding the market dynamics in Texas and the regulatory environment is obviously, extremely important. So we appreciate you, giving us insight into that and everything that's going on, and appreciate everything you're doing for Texas. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, appreciate you, Reed. Thanks to you and Lauren for setting this up. And as always, if anyone on the call, anyone in your alliance has anything they want to talk about, feel free to reach out and we'll get something set up.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate y'all. Have a good day.
You too.